Hello and welcome to Autotech Digital Economy Infotainment. I'm your host, Christy Swainsburg, Principal Analyst for Digital Economy and Sustainability at Wards Intelligence. Thank you for joining me today for what promises to be an interesting chat on the emerging sector of digital economy in the automotive infotainment space. In the past, infotainment largely was what came with your vehicle in the initial purchase, minus any features you would bring into the car on a smartphone. Today, automakers and suppliers alike are trying to figure out how to continuously monetize features already existing in vehicles, as well as devise new infotainment features. Exploring the latter strategy is AGC Automotive Americas, a leading supplier of automotive glazing for the North American OEM and aftermarket industries. Joining me today from AGC is Terry Yim, Strategic Marketing Leader for AGC Automotive America. In his current role, Terry is finding innovative ways to integrate glass-based technologies into the evolving automotive mobility landscape. Prior to AGC, Terry worked for Samsung's mobile division, managing global open innovation and product strategy initiatives. He also was a strategy analyst and consultant for Accenture's South Korea office. Welcome to Autotech Digital Economy, Terry. Thanks for joining me today.
Thank you for having me. Pleasure to be here.
So AGC has been known as a glazing supplier, but you're trying to take the company beyond that into other areas, right? Could you explain a bit about what you're trying to do?
Yeah, so at AGC, we supply all the traditional types of glazing that you would think of on the automobile. So the sunroofs, the windshields, the side windows, the back window, and even the interior cover glass on some of those displays as well. But we are looking at new ways to integrate glazing with new value-added features and technologies that really align with the evolving mobility landscape that we're seeing and new types of technology use cases. AGC Automotive is part of the AGC Group, and the entire company practices a management philosophy that we call ambidextrous management, meaning that while we're maintaining our core businesses, we're also pursuing new innovations to expand upon those businesses as well. It sounds easier than it really is, but it really creates a need for a different type of mindset. And within AGC, we have a lot of R&D activities in all of our different regions. And so that makes it a lot easier for us to start to pursue these different types of developments on top of our normal core glazing business as well.
Sure. So today, maybe more than ever, there's a lot of attention being paid to glass, to keep heat out in the summer, to conserve electricity. Glass has moved from being a commodity item to a high-tech item to manage energy smartly in the age of EVs, right?
Yeah, actually, that's a really good example with EVs and trying to show how glass is kind of shifting maybe from a commodity to a high-tech type of solution. When we think of EVs, so you mentioned conserving electricity, some solutions that address that, for example, we might think of in terms of maybe what I call like a passive and an active way. So from a commodity perspective with EVs, one solution that we might think of is something like we call like a low E. And this is something that is an invisible metal coating that goes over the glass, but essentially it helps to reflect the IR rays that would be coming into the cabin otherwise. And so it helps to control the heat in the cabin. And ultimately that helps to conserve the electricity. That's more of I guess, the traditional way you could think of it with a type of coating. But there are also active type of solutions. One of those is what we call like switchable glazing or smart glazing, it might be referred to. But this is a type of solution where it's a transparent display or transparent piece of glass, I'm sorry. And then with pushing electricity current through it, we can turn that to an opaque piece of glass. And that at that state can start to reflect the IR rays as well and keep the cabin cool. So you can see how with a passive way that might be more commodity, but with an active solution like a switchable glazing, we can start to control that kind of on demand as well. Another benefit of the switchable glazing also is that you can kind of remove the sunshade in some circumstances by being able to control the opaqueness. And in that sense, if you're able to remove that actual sunshade, you can actually help to lightweight the vehicle. So for an EV, that can also help to create a benefit as well.
Sure. So a lot of money is being invested today by OEMs on headlights and lighting sequences. What role does glazing play in helping a car have personality?
Personality, yeah. There's a lot of different ways glass could definitely give a car personality. I think one way to think about it could be like with the interior versus exterior aesthetics. So on the interior, there's a lot of different ways. I had mentioned cover glass before, for an example, for displays on the interior. We start to see more different kind of curved displays expanding across the cockpit in automotive. And for some of those curved 3D displays are not so easy to do. But by making those, we're allowing that kind of, I guess, interior aesthetic to kind of develop within the interior. AGC, we've also offered the market some kind of like, I guess, luxury glass as well. One example, in some of the Lexus vehicles, we had a solution called Kiriko, which was glass, but it was kind of designed to look really elegant with a lot of different, I guess, textures. It looked kind of almost like a diamond, I guess you could say, on the side of the door. And so you can kind of create that luxury feeling through that as well. We have a lot of different solutions for like colors as well, and different textures and designs. That also applies actually for exterior glass as well. We can play with the color a little bit. We have a solution called Pure Gray, which creates a very nice aesthetic with the color. So color is a different way to, I guess, give the car personality through the glass. Those might be some of the more obvious ways. There are probably some, I guess, not so obvious ways that it can help give the car personality. One thing that comes to mind is actually the antenna glass. We can actually hide antennas or create an antenna system through the actual glazing. And so if you've ever seen those shark fins on vehicles with the antennas, you might notice that some of the vehicles don't have them, and it creates more of a sleek design. For example, a lot of the new EVs you see are just kind of this very smooth exterior design. Antenna glass is one way to get rid of those shark fins. So there are ways that it can help to improve that type of aesthetic as well. Yeah, and even from a tech savvy perspective with switchable glazing, when you're implementing those kind of technologies into the vehicle, it definitely can give, I guess, a persona to that vehicle owner in terms of kind of being a high-tech type of gadgety type of owner, I guess you could say. But yeah, there are definitely a lot of ways that glazing can add to the personality of the vehicle.
As information becomes more and more critical inside the car to monitor the EV system or just meet consumer desires, what's being done to make displays clear, especially head-up displays?
Head-up display, yeah, that's a really good one. So with head-up displays, in terms of trying to make those displays clearer, first I would differentiate between what I call, I guess, like the traditional HUD and newer augmented reality HUDs. The trend with traditional HUDs was, I guess, trying to make the size of the display bigger and the field of the view bigger to try to get those elements more visible. But with AR HUD, it's starting to become, the contents are starting to become more integrated into the field of view and the actual landscape of the driver. And that, in one sense, can help to make it a little bit more palatable. Another way is actually using the black band underneath the transparent area on the windshield. And that's one thing that we had shown recently last year at CES with a partner. But by displaying contents on that black band below the transparent area on the windshield, that actually helps to show the display quite clearly as well. Actually, we do have a video as well that we can show that can kind of demonstrate that also.
Very cool. Thanks, Carrie, for showing us that. So how can augmented reality head-up displays help reduce driver distraction and maybe demonstrate future use cases in autonomous vehicles?
That's another great question as well. So I think as we could see in the video, one thing was, I guess, kind of the ease or the clarity of looking at that. So there's two aspects. One, you could see with the navigation, for example, how those arrows are integrated into the actual road. That's one way that it can help to make a big difference, I guess you could say, in terms of the visibility or keeping the eyes on the road. But also you could see the black band area as well had those contents quite clearly displayed on there. So that's that kind of ties into, I think, the driver distraction because it kind of helps to keep the eyes on the road, I guess you could say. That also is a big topic when it comes to future use cases in autonomous vehicles, I think. When we think of autonomous vehicles, it's through L5, there's different levels of autonomy. L4, L5 might be further off, but today on the roads, we can still see autopilot solutions like L2. And when those come into play, I've read studies, I think through 1 through AAA, where with L2, you start to see that as drivers are able to, I guess you could say, disengage and have the vehicle drive for them, they're starting to become more distracted in the vehicle. So even though they're still supposed to be, paying attention and be able to take over, it's more easy to be distracted. And I think in that case, the importance of having additional tools in the vehicle to offset that, HUD being one of those potential solutions, is very important because the more that L2 or L3 is adopted and people are playing with the other types of connected devices in their vehicle, they're going to need something else that will help them to pay attention to the road, keep their eyes on the road. So I think that's another big way that AR HUD comes into play. And I think there's legislation, I think that was proposed to go into that kind of study or to have the DOT look into that and have, kind of recommended solutions. And I think HUD definitely plays into that kind of scenario as one of those, potential solutions.
Got it. So what's possible when it comes to glass in vehicles in terms of digital economy?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting question, and it really, there's a lot of different ways to think about it. One way to think about it is, I like to think of glass as an actual kind of electronic device or an enabler for displaying types of digital economy contents, for example. Here's an example. The switchable glazing that I talked about, when you can control it and you switch a transparent piece of glass into an opaque dark surface. Another thing that you might have seen at one of these past CESs is you can turn that, after turning it to an opaque surface, you can actually project an image onto there. And so now you have a piece of glass that can be acting as an actual display. And once you have a display, if it's a connected vehicle or a connected system, now you can start bringing in different types of digital economy services and tools that enable that. So glass is kind of that conduit or that medium that can definitely be the enabler for that. It's an interesting way that comes into play there because it's not one that is normally thought of. That particular use case, again, might be more on the commercial side sometimes than the consumer, which I think is another important thing to think about when we think about glass in digital economy. There probably are big differences between the commercial sectors and the consumer sectors as well. Another big one actually is I talked about before with antenna glass. And I think with digital economy, connectivity for the vehicle becomes so important. We hear a lot about the connected vehicles, but once we get down to it, for those connected services or the digital economy services to continue working, constant connectivity to that vehicle is very important. And so I think when glass antennas are used to help with that process, that's another way that glass indirectly actually helps come into play with that the digital economy as well. Even going further, glass is kind of a sensor cover to help the sensors actually function better. A lot of times, some of these services might be depending on the data coming from those sensors on the vehicle. So glass helping those sensors function better or have more uptime, those kind of things can help the overall service perform better as well.
Are there new revenue streams possible where suppliers share in this ongoing continuous revenue being generated by the vehicle versus selling a product just once, do you think?
Yeah, I think this is kind of a sort of a holy grail question, I think, across the board for a lot of players in the industry. My personal opinion is that, first of all, it's something that every OEM or every supplier, everyone involved should be thinking of, whether they've been involved in it before or not. We're looking at a future with software-defined vehicles and connected services in the vehicles. And so from a supplier point of view, how do we fit into that future vision of a software-defined vehicle as well? And so I think it's something everyone should be thinking of. How can you continuously earn, recurring revenue versus just that one-time sale? I think for suppliers, it could be even more difficult of a mindset change than for OEM. But I can give a couple examples from a glass perspective, but also from other things that I've seen from other suppliers. With AGC, so typically we would be selling, one windshield, one solution, one-time sale. But we have another solution on the digital side, for example, called Jack. And this solution is meant more for, fleet ops, but essentially it helps to predict by placing a sensor on the windshield, is that windshield about to break, and will it need an eventual replacement? And by knowing that information ahead of time, we can actually circumvent and prevent that actual total replacement and repair the glass for a much, much cheaper cost. And so for fleet operators, that's a very attractive solution. But as you can see, that type of solution is maybe a subscription based with some of the fleet operators. But it is definitely not just a one-time hardware sale or piece of glass sale, for example. If you've been at bring up CES all the time, but we see a lot of this stuff coming up there as well. Bosch, if you look at their booth, they have a lot of emphasis on actual soft services or connected services as well. That could be potential for recurring revenues. Some of the tire manufacturers had interesting use cases with having AI algorithms and sensors in the tires to be able to predict or make the replacement process much more efficient there as well. I think that type of thinking is really important for a lot of different suppliers and OEMs to think about. Another aspect actually is that is more of an in-house kind of perspective as well. And I think the in-house versus external partnerships is another big part of this when we're looking at different kind of continuous revenue streams versus one-time. Because for a lot of the recurring revenue services, this might entail working with other existing digital economy services, streaming services, or other types of telematics services that might have some type of revenue potential as well. So how you can partner with those types of services to bring that to market, that's also an important consideration in terms of thinking about what is possible for ongoing continuous revenues versus just a one-time sale. Right.
If you could look into your crystal ball, how do you think digital economy is going to play out in the automotive sector? Do you think customers are going to pay again to have services they might already have in their house, such as like Netflix or Hulu, in their car?
It's an interesting one. I think it's going to be something more of, I guess you could say, it could depend on the service itself and if it's an existing user or not. For an existing service, for example, when I was on Netflix just the other day, for example, I had gone on and I got a notification that there was like too many devices streaming from the same account. So let's say that we have this in another vehicle now. So within a family, let's say now they're starting to utilize the service more, in another vehicle. That might get them to pay another $5.99 or so, to be able to include that or watch it in there. So I can see that kind of use case with existing customers, with newer customers as well. So if you're not an existing, Spotify consumer, and you go into a vehicle and it's there, that's something you could potentially pay extra for. I think SiriusXM is a good example of that, and when you find that in vehicles as well today. So yeah, whether they're going to pay for it, I think it kind of falls into those little caveats in terms of if it makes sense with their already current usage of the service itself. Your first question there, you start off kind of how will the digital economy play out overall in the automotive sector? I think that's a really interesting bigger question as well. And I think there are probably a lot of key learnings to consider as well when it comes to, I guess, dynamics, between automakers or suppliers and the different partners that are there as well. So that is another big consideration to take into account, I think. It's probably going to be similar to, I think, what I saw in the smartphone industry, where there are going to be a lot of new types of, I guess, explorations into those digital ecosystem partners. And that can lead to, I think, more UI or UX considerations. And here's what I mean by that. The more partnerships I think that are bringing in, there has to be some type of interface to interact with all of these different services. And so that could be like a home screen, for example, on the, within the vehicle, for example. And so I think, how we are actually considering which partners to bring in and what we're showing on there starts to become very important, because if you bring in all the different types of partners, you start to have a very kind of cluttered experience for the end user. And so I think UI and UX and how that delivery gets to the end consumer is going to be a very big part of how digital economy plays out in the automotive sector. So how are we going to get that in front of the consumer in a nice, friendly way, I think, as well.
Yeah. Just as a reminder, if anybody has a question for Terry, please type it in the Q&A box. Terry, how can HUD broaden what OEMs can do as far as revenue-generating features, do you think?
I think this is a tricky question, because I think there could be, it is a display and it has some type of different opportunities for services that consumers might be interested in, if it's a special navigation feature or a safety feature. But I think also the bigger question is, if there are those kind of features that can be brought to HUD, can it be brought in a safe way? I think it is the bigger question. There can be a lot of different contents that we can consider that could generate revenue that could potentially be put onto a HUD display. But I think there would have to be a lot of different considerations for how safe that is for the driver. If we're having actual app icons or information show up, how much, more of a distraction is that versus, an actual navigation or mapping type of solution on the screen. I think there is a big difference to consider there as well. So I think, yes, there could be potential, but I think there has to be an even bigger consideration on things like safety and how it fits into the actual driver's day-to-day operation.
Of course. So is the best route to offering customers access to their preferred services through partnerships between telematics providers and streaming services, or should the automaker cherry pick partners and build bespoke infotainment systems?
Yeah, I think it may be a combination of the two, but I think overall the biggest thing is to make sure that that end customer, if it's a business or an end user, has access to all of the different options. In other words, you don't want to create a situation where you have such a unique kind of system that it's not going to be able to integrate other types of services that might be interested to the end customer. And in that sense, something more of maybe like an open ecosystem or an app store type of concept where the end user can actually choose for themselves and have access to all of the different options, I think is really kind of a baseline of what's needed. And on top of that, though, there probably are going to be those unique scenarios where maybe an OEM or a supplier and a different partner have some kind of unique differentiation, maybe with a bespoke type of system. So there could be those kind of use cases, but I think overall, it has to be very open because the end consumer is going to have a lot of different desires or different types of solutions that they want to use. So being cut off from those is all you want to do to pretty much avoid.
Okay. Terry, we're seeing a lot of screens in the back of cars now. They're not necessary for safety or for driving in the vehicle, but for strictly entertainment purposes. Do you think they need to match the quality of home entertainment systems?
Sometimes, I guess. It's first of all, maybe you need a good consideration of what devices are already available. So you're probably bringing in like a tablet or a smartphone. So I would say, just my opinion is, it would have to be something similar to that. where you wouldn't want, where someone would want to actually utilize that extra screen if they already have another screen in their hand, for example. But I think they're kind of building off there is another kind of interesting use case in terms of how maybe another device interacts with that screen behind. So for example, if you have a smartphone and you want to screen share to a bigger screen, for example, or control a game on a bigger screen or something like that. I'm just thinking of ideas off the top of my head, but those could also be kind of additional considerations there in terms of kind of comparing it to a home entertainment system or not. Another thing actually might be with, again, commercial versus private. So with a commercial vehicle, you might have to have other considerations like keeping fingerprints off of that screen or something like that. And those type of things might actually affect the end quality, I guess you could say. Where in a passenger vehicle, you might not be dealing with that type of thing as much as well.
Okay. With the augmented reality HUD, are you pursuing that commercial customer or strictly private vehicle owner, or what's your outlook for that product?
The first one is for the commercial, so kind of building off of our existing HUD. It is interesting though to think of HUD use cases in commercial as well, because now it doesn't necessarily have to be a driver. And now we can start to think, just using that technology and placing it on another area and creating a screen off that. If you're using some type of augmented reality effect to kind of integrate that into the landscape, that becomes very interesting as well, I think.
Mm-hmm. And then on the personal and private vehicle side, is this really geared toward that sort of big luxury SUV crossover sedan segment, or could you also make use of the augmented reality HUD in, say, a compact mass market car?
I would love to see that in a mass market car, and you could. And I think it will get there. And I think a lot of those use cases, when I think the need for safety and additional safety tools comes into play, and if it's accepted there and it comes to market in a much more scalable way, I think we'll start to see that a lot more in mass market vehicles as well. But you're right. For now, it's kind of started off as kind of one of those luxury items that has kind of been coming at a higher cost. But that should go down with time and scale.
And what's the timeline, the projected timeline for when we might see AR HUD in market?
Very soon. Very soon. Yeah. I know we have customers talking about it. I'm not sure if I can say anything yet, but it is very soon. And if you've heard announcements for other OEMs or been keeping up with tech news, there's a lot of talk about this, so it's something that's going to be quite prevalent and growing, I would say, in times to come for sure.
Okay, well, congratulations. And thank you, everyone, for joining us today. We've come to the end of our time. Again, I'm Christy Swinesberg from Wards and Informa, and thank you, Terry Yim from AGC Automotive Americas, for joining me for this great chat today. Just as a reminder, we're going to have a recording of this available within 24 hours, so if you'd like to view it again, you can. And thank you again for joining me. Have a great day, everyone.